She banned me from her own charity gala, the one built on my money, my connections, and my name. My daughter told me I'd embarrass her donors, that I didn't fit her image of success. But she forgot one thing: accountants never forget numbers. And every dollar she raised, every guest she invited, all of it traced back to me. She just didn't know the biggest sponsor of her event was also her father. My name is Robert Callahan, 74 years old. For 4 decades, I ran Callahan & Sons Accounting, a firm that balanced the books for everyone from hardware store owners to senators. Numbers were my life. They made sense when people didn't. After my wife Evelyn left for California with a tech entrepreneur, when our daughter Grace was 7, numbers were the only thing that stayed faithful. I raised Grace alone in a modest white house in Palm Beach Gardens. We didn't have yachts or ski trips, but we had breakfast at the same table every morning. I taught her that integrity isn't inherited. It's earned one decision at a time. When she started the Grace Foundation for Youth Empowerment, I couldn't have been prouder. I donated the seed capital, $320,000 from my retirement fund, under one condition: she'd run it with honesty. Last month, Grace called to say she was hosting her biggest event yet, a $500,000 charity gala at the Seaside Grand Hotel, black tie-only guests flying in from D.C. and New York. She sounded nervous, excited, radiant. She said, "Dad, this is my moment. The Palm Beach Herald is covering it. Evelyn will be there too. It's going to be perfect." Evelyn, the woman who vanished with a single note on the kitchen table and a maxed-out joint credit card. She hadn't seen Grace in 26 years yet. Somehow she'd been rebranded as the visionary co-founder of the foundation. When I saw the first article online, the photo nearly made me choke on my coffee. Headline: Mother-daughter duo redefines philanthropy. There she was, Evelyn Callahan Pierce, elegant in silver silk, arm around our daughter, smiling like she'd never missed a single bedtime story. That evening, Grace invited me to a pre-gala family dinner at the Vanderbilt Club downtown. I wore my best navy suit, the one I'd kept from my retirement ceremony, and brought her a small gift, a framed photo of the two of us at her college graduation. When I arrived, I realized I didn't belong. Every man in the room wore Italian tailoring. Every woman wore diamonds that looked like mortgage payments. And there was my daughter, radiant, laughing, introducing Evelyn as the woman who inspired all of this. When she saw me, her smile faltered for half a second. "Dad, you made it." Before I could answer, a tall man approached Dr. Nathan Pierce, her fiancé. "Robert, sir," he said politely, "Grace told me so much about you." "It's an honor." He meant it, I think. But when the waiter hesitated at my table, asking quietly if I was with the sponsors or the staff, I knew the hierarchy had already been set. Dinner was foie gras, lobster bisque, and conversation about hedge funds. I stayed quiet, listening as Evelyn described how Grace's upbringing in a disciplined home had shaped her work ethic. Disciplined, that home was me, a single father, juggling 2 jobs and night classes so she could attend private school. Halfway through dessert, Grace cleared her throat. "Dad, before the gala, I wanted to talk to you about optics." The table went still. Some of our donors are image conscious. They come from old money families. I just think maybe it's best if you skip this one. It's nothing personal. Skip it, I repeated quietly. Evelyn chimed in smoothly. "Robert, dear, you know how these circles work. This is a luxury event, elegance, exclusivity. You'd be so uncomfortable. It's best for everyone." Grace reached for my hand. "Dad, I just don't want you to feel out of place." You've already done so much for me. You can watch the live stream." I looked at her, the same little girl who once drew hearts on my briefcase with a red marker and wrote, "Daddy is my hero." Now she was politely excusing me from her success story. I set down my napkin, smiled, and said, "Congratulations, sweetheart. I hope it's everything you dreamed of." Evelyn smiled, satisfied. Grace exhaled in relief. But what neither of them realized was that the smile I gave wasn't surrender. It was calculation, quiet, exact, and absolute. If she wanted a world without me, she was about to learn what that world really cost. Because beneath the designer gowns and gala lights, the numbers still belonged to me. And I'd make sure they balanced publicly. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from Palm Beach, Chicago? Maybe somewhere quieter. I'd like to know how far stories like this travel. When I got home that night, the ocean was calm. Too calm. The kind of stillness that comes before a storm you already know is coming. I loosened my tie, poured myself a glass of water, no bourbon, no bitterness, and walked into my study. The one room in the house that still smelled like ink and oak. On the shelves were ledgers from decades past, client files, tax codes, and audit reports, dating back to when Nixon was in office. But behind those books, hidden in a steel safe, were the ledgers that mattered most. The Callahan Family Trust, the Grace Foundation seed documents, and the transfer certificates with my own initials. I unlocked the safe and began pulling out files. Page after page, each signed by me, dated 12 years ago. That foundation, my daughter called her own creation. It had started with a deposit from my retirement fund, $320,000. I'd called it an educational endowment for youth programs. She'd renamed it after herself 2 years later when Evelyn resurfaced, claiming she wanted to help Grace expand her reach. The name changed, but the EIN number never did. That number, that IRS identity, still linked directly to Callahan and Sons Financial Trust. And every time Grace bragged about her independent success, she was really standing on my balance sheet. I sat at my desk and turned on the brass lamp. The yellow light caught a photo of Grace at age 7, missing her front tooth, holding up a paper sign that said, "World's Best Dad." I'd kept it taped to my fridge for 30 years. I'd replaced refrigerators, not the sign. I opened my laptop and logged into the foundation's donor portal, the one I'd built myself, when Grace first started fundraising. Password hadn't changed, integrity. 79. Within seconds, the truth appeared in columns and percentages. 72% of total assets still originated from my trust. Another 20 came from private sponsors, half of them my old clients who donated because I asked. The rest, barely 8%, came from Evelyn's network of philanthropists. And yet somehow, Evelyn was now the face of the brand, smiling on magazine covers under headlines like, "From Motherhood to $1,000,000 Impact." Helen Brooks, my old partner and the sharpest auditor I'd ever trained, had retired last year. But when I called her cell phone, she answered on the second ring. "Robert," she said, "I knew this day would come." I told her what happened, the dinner, the banishment, the gala that had rewritten history. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she said quietly, "Do you want comfort or correction?" "Correction," I said. "Then send me access to the foundation's books. I'll run a private audit tonight." 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with a text. "Found something. Check your email. You'll want to see this." I opened the file. There it was, a 6-month statement of miscellaneous PR expenses, $14,000 to a luxury spa in Napa, $9,800 for personal development retreats, $18,500 in payments to a marketing firm registered under Evelyn Pierce Holdings, LLC. Grace's name was on every authorization line. I scrolled further. The Gala's vendor payments, floral design, champagne, sponsorship, entertainment, all billed to accounts paid from the trust. My trust. Helen's note at the bottom said, "Robert, if she's hosting a $500K event on your capital, then legally it's still your event. And if Evelyn's taking credit, she's about to learn what a real audit looks like." I leaned back in my chair. The numbers didn't lie, they never did. When I was 40, I once saved a senator's career by finding a missing $40,000 in his campaign filings. He called it a miracle. I called it arithmetic. This time, the miracle would be public clarity. I picked up my pen and wrote a single line in my planner under November 18th. Audit 7 p.m. Seaside Grand Hotel. Then I closed the laptop and stared out the window at the waves rolling beneath the moonlight. For 74 years, I'd lived by one rule: what you build with honesty, you can defend with proof. Grace and Evelyn wanted a story without me, all glamour, no groundwork. Fine. But I was going to remind them that every fairy tale still has an accountant waiting at the end to reconcile the numbers. I whispered to myself, let them have their spotlight. I'll bring the balance. And as I locked the safe, a quiet peace settled in my chest. Not anger, not revenge, just certainty. Because this wasn't about vengeance. It was about correction. And I've never lost a single audit in my life. That night I prayed not for payback, but for precision. Because if God keeps count of every sparrow that falls, surely He keeps count of every sacrifice a father makes. The phone rang the next morning while I was making coffee. I recognized the number instantly, Grace's personal line. I let it ring twice before picking up. "Good morning, sweetheart." Her voice was bright but not natural. The same tone she used when she had to deliver bad news politely. "Hi, Dad. I wanted to check on you after dinner last night. You seemed quiet." "I was just listening," I said. "That's what accountants do best." She laughed softly, then exhaled. "Dad, I don't want you to feel left out. The gala's it's not really your scene. It's black tie, red carpet, media donors, people who don't want grease under their fingernails," I finished for her. There was a pause. "That's not what I meant." "But it's what you thought." Her silence confirmed it. Then came Evelyn's voice faintly in the background, too close to the receiver. "Tell him we appreciate everything he's done, but it's time to move forward." Grace cleared her throat. "Dad, Mom's just trying to help me build the right image." Her friends, these people, expect a certain level of sophistication. You've always taught me about professionalism. Professionalism and pretense are different things, Grace. I know, she said quickly, but appearances matter. These are donors, investors, even the governor's office is sending someone. Mom knows how to talk their language. You wouldn't be comfortable in that world. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. Comfort has never been my currency. "I deal in truth," she sighed. "Dad, I'm not trying to hurt you. I just want this to be perfect." Mom says it's time for me to have a clean public narrative, one that doesn't confuse people with messy family history. "You understand, right?" "Perfectly," I said. "A clean narrative. No smudges, no fingerprints." There was relief in her voice when she said, "Thank you, Dad. I knew you'd understand." I ended the call with a simple, "Have a wonderful event." The moment the line went dead, I opened my laptop. I logged into Palm State Bank, where the Callahan Family Trust was housed. A few clicks brought me to the sub-account labeled Grace Foundation Disbursements. Balance $418,236.12. Scheduled outgoing transfers, November 18th, $72,000. Venue final payment, November 19th, 11th, $500. Catering additions, November 19th, 9,200. Entertainment contract, all automated. All programmed to process 2 hours before the gala began. I clicked Modify Schedule. A small window popped up. Cancel or reschedule outgoing payments. I chose Reschedule. Effective date, November 19th, 11:59 p.m. Every payment would freeze until after the gala ended. Every vendor expecting funds that night would see the same red message pending account review. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd excluded me for image, but their image depended on my digits clearing through the bank. I wasn't angry, just surgical. After decades of audits, you learn that truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just quietly balances the sheet when no one's watching. Still, I wanted confirmation. I called Helen. She answered with her usual efficiency. "Morning, Robert. You make your decision." I did, I said. "Cancel nothing. Just delay the transfers by 24 hours. She chuckled. "Oh, that's cruel and elegant. You'll watch the whole circus unravel before the payment clears." "I'm not watching it burn," I said. "I'm just cutting off the fuel." "Same outcome," she replied dryly. "I'll draft the notice of audit review so it looks procedural. No one will suspect a thing until they run the first card." "Good," I said. "Let's keep this between us." When I hung up, I felt an odd calm, like the peace you get after closing a ledger you've balanced to the last cent. I walked to the balcony and looked over the water. The Palm Beach skyline shimmered under the late morning sun, all glass towers and yachts. I used to think success was measured by who invited you to dinner. Now I knew better. Success is when you can end the dinner without raising your voice and still control the bill afterward. That afternoon, a courier arrived with a gilded envelope. "The Grace Foundation requests the honor of your absence." I smiled. They didn't have to worry. Because while Grace and Evelyn were designing flower walls and polishing champagne flutes, I was redesigning something far more important, their illusion of control. The next morning, Helen showed up at my door, holding 2 lattes and a stack of folders thick enough to build a small bridge. "Before you ask," she said, dropping them on the dining table. I double-checked every number. "You were right. They've turned your foundation into a designer circus." I raised an eyebrow. "Define circus." She flipped open the first folder. "Let's start with Champagne Maison Delacroix Reserve Vintage, imported from France, $14,800. Floral arrangements, $22,600. Lighting and decor, $16,400. Entertainment, a jazz band from New Orleans, $10,000. Flat fee, not including travel." Travel. Helen smirked. "Business class. For all 7 musicians." She turned another page. "Venue lease for Seaside Grand Hotel Ballroom, $72,000, paid in installments. Catering, $58,000. Security, valet, red carpet, staging, social media influencers, another $30,000. I whistled softly. $500,000 in total. "Exactly," she said, tapping her pen. "And 72% of that comes from your trust fund funneled through RC Advisors LLC, which, in case you forgot, is you." I leaned back in my chair. "They built their empire on my patience." Helen smiled. "And your signature." She handed me the audit summary. "Robert, if this were a public company, they'd be facing SEC penalties for misrepresentation. You've been erased from the narrative, but your name is still on every dollar." I nodded slowly. Good. Let's keep it that way until the curtain call. Helen studied me. You're not doing this out of revenge, are you? No, I said. I'm doing it out of accuracy. She laughed quietly. Only you would turn betrayal into an accounting project. It's what I know. I walked to the window and looked out at the Atlantic sunlight breaking into gold ribbons over the water. She thinks she's protecting her image, I said. But she's about to learn that image without foundation collapses faster than a false balance sheet. Helen took a sip of her latte. You know the irony is poetic. They're selling virtue with borrowed money. Grace calls it philanthropy. You call it fraud. Different vocabulary, I said. Same arithmetic. There was a long pause. The kind of quiet that fills a room before something shifts forever. Helen finally asked, "What do you want me to do next?" I turned back toward her. Prepare the audit memo. Date it the night of the gala, timestamp it 7 p.m. sharp. I'll need 1 copy for the press and 1 for the hotel manager. You're going public. I shook my head. Not yet. I'm just making sure the truth shows up exactly when the cameras are rolling. Evelyn wants a spotlight, I'll give her one. Helen closed her laptop and stood. You're playing this like a chess game. I'm an accountant, I said. I never move without knowing the closing balance. When she left, I walked back to the table, spread out the expense sheets, and began to mark them in red ink, 1 column for legitimate costs, another for Evelyn's self-indulgences. The red column filled faster. I circled the final total and whispered to myself, they owe me $418,600, not in dollars, but in truth. My phone buzzed, a message from Grace. Mom says we might get a feature in Forbes after the gala. Thank you for understanding. I'll send photos. I typed a reply, then deleted it. Some lessons are better learned without footnotes. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I opened the bank portal again. The scheduled transfers were still frozen. Everything was in motion. Quietly, cleanly, perfectly timed. No yelling, no vengeance, just math. And I'll tell you this, there's a special peace that comes when justice doesn't need an audience. That night, I lit a single candle on the balcony, the kind Grace used to call Dad's budgeting ritual back when she did homework beside me. Maybe she'd forgotten those nights, but I hadn't. I looked up at the sky black velvet scattered with light and smiled. Lord, I whispered, I'm not asking you to punish them. Just let the truth add up in public. If you're still here with me, type 1 in the comments. Let me know you're still following this story, because the real reckoning is only beginning. By the time November 18th arrived, Palm Beach looked like a movie set. The sky was spotless, the air smelled of salt and gardenias, and the front entrance of the Seaside Grand Hotel gleamed beneath a crystal chandelier large enough to light a cathedral. That night was supposed to belong to Grace Callahan and Evelyn Pierce, the mother-daughter visionaries redefining philanthropy. It said so right on the 10-foot banner hanging above the red carpet. I didn't attend, of course. I didn't need to. I had a front-row seat to the truth streaming in full HD from my laptop in my study, the same desk where every donation had once been processed, every financial report drafted, and every sacrifice made invisible. The live feed opened with a reporter from Palm Beach Herald Live. Behind her luxury cars lined the circular driveway, Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, even a Ferrari or two. Cameras flashed as guests in tuxedos and floor-length gowns climbed the marble steps. Music drifted through the feed, a jazz quartet playing Fly Me to the Moon. I leaned closer to the screen. There she was, Grace walking the carpet in a silver gown that shimmered like moonlight arm linked with Evelyn, who looked 10 years younger than her birth certificate. They stopped for photos, smiling, waving. Evelyn spoke first to the reporter. Tonight isn't about wealth, it's about purpose, about showing what women can build when they lead with authenticity. Grace added softly, and about gratitude for every person who's believed in us along this journey. Gratitude. That word tasted bitter. I clicked the next camera angle inside the ballroom. Towers of white orchids, each centerpiece taller than the average man. Champagne walls shaped like angel wings. And on the stage, a massive LED screen glowing with the foundation's logo, the Grace Foundation for Youth Empowerment. Tables sparkled with crystal gold-rimmed plates and name cards written in calligraphy. And there it was, my favorite detail, the sponsor board. A backlit display listing every major donor, at the top in bold silver font, presented by RC Advisors, LLC. I couldn't help smiling. The same company they thought was a faceless investor was me. Around 7 o'clock, Grace stepped up to the podium to welcome the guests. Her voice trembled slightly at first, then found its rhythm. My mother taught me that true success isn't about where you start, but about the story you create. Applause. Cameras flashed. And my father. She paused just long enough for the crowd to lean in, taught me the value of hard work and responsibility. Even if he couldn't be here tonight, I know he'd be proud. A perfectly crafted line. Safe. Sanitized. I felt the corner of my mouth tighten. Pride isn't an accessory, I thought. It's a record, and mine had just been redacted. The camera cut to Evelyn, who sat beaming at table 1, basking in reflected light. To her right sat Senator Lawrence Duval and his wife Marianne, both old clients of mine from decades ago. I wondered if they knew whose trust was paying for their champagne. Helen called right on cue. "You seeing this?" she asked. "I am," I said. "They're selling a story and business is booming. They're about to hit intermission," she said. "Everything's in place. Systems ready." "Good. Let's give them their full 15 minutes. "Robert," she said gently. "Do you ever wish it didn't have to come to this every day?" I answered. "But some lessons don't fit into polite conversation." Back on screen, the auctioneer announced the next item, a weekend stay at a Napa vineyard courtesy of Evelyn Pierce Wellness Retreats. The crowd applauded again. The irony was divine. Evelyn was auctioning her own self-care packages, using my account's line of credit. I leaned back and took a slow sip of coffee. "Enjoy the show, ladies," I murmured, because in 30 minutes the curtain falls. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The MC's voice echoed through the speakers. "Now please join us in honoring tonight's presenting sponsor, RC Advisors, LLC, for their extraordinary generosity and ongoing partnership with the foundation." Thunderous applause. Grace and Evelyn stood smiling, waving gracefully to the crowd, my crowd. And I, the invisible man behind the digits, smiled right back from 3 miles away. They wanted spectacle. They were about to get substance. They wanted a story. I was about to give them the footnotes at exactly 8:15 p.m. The moment Grace lifted her glass to toast the crowd, the screen behind her flickered. The shimmering foundation logo froze mid-glow. The lights dimmed not for effect, but for failure. I sat in my study watching the live stream buffer into static. Then it returned grainy shaky as a cameraman whispered, "Something's wrong with the payment terminal." Something was indeed wrong. The account holding every vendor's money, the one that kept this $500,000 fantasy spinning, had just entered audit lock. Helen texted me one word, Activated. Inside the ballroom, murmurs spread like wildfire. Guests shifted in their seats, whispering. The hotel's event coordinator appeared on stage, panic tucked neatly behind her forced smile. Ladies and gentlemen, we're just having a small technical hiccup with the live donations portal. Please enjoy your dinner. We'll resume in a moment. The jazz band, blissfully unaware, started playing Blue Moon. But the mood had changed. At 8:23, my phone buzzed again, Helen calling. They've tried to run 4 credit card transactions, she said. All declined. The system message reads, account temporarily frozen pending compliance verification. And the vendors I asked. Already calling the hotel manager. He's checking with the bank. I smiled faintly. That's the problem with illusions, Helen. They don't survive contact with math. By 8:30, Grace had vanished backstage. Evelyn followed the smile she'd worn for cameras, replaced by a look I remembered from 26 years ago. The look she gave me the night she walked out, fear wrapped in entitlement. The live stream cut to a wide shot of confused guests sipping champagne they hadn't technically paid for. Then movement at the stage. A man in a gray suit stepped up to the microphone. Good evening, he said, his voice carrying authority. My name is Anthony Rhodes, Senior Compliance Officer for Palm State Bank. The room fell silent. He held up a file folder. As of 8:00 p.m., the primary funding account for the Grace Foundation for Youth Empowerment was placed under temporary review due to irregularities in expense reporting. The source of principal funding has been identified as the Callahan Family Trust, established and maintained by Mr. Robert Callahan. The sound of forks hitting plates echoed across the ballroom. Evelyn emerged from backstage, face pale but posture defiant. This is absurd. There must be a mistake. The officer remained calm. Ma'am, there is no mistake. The trust owner authorized a full audit effective tonight. Our investigation indicates that certain disbursements, including personal expenditures and retreat costs, were misclassified as program expenses. As such, all outgoing payments are frozen pending verification. Someone in the audience gasped. Another guest whispered, "That's the father, isn't it?" The accountant. Grace appeared beside Evelyn, her mascara streaked from tears. "Dad, please," she said, her voice trembling through the microphone feed that caught every syllable. "Don't do this. Not like this." I leaned closer to the laptop. She was looking out into the crowd, searching for me as if she somehow knew I was watching. Evelyn snatched the mic. "Robert, if you're behind this, you're destroying your own daughter's reputation." I whispered to the screen, "No, Evelyn, I'm correcting her balance sheet." The officer turned toward the audience again. Pending the audit, all further fundraising is suspended. Donations made tonight will be held in escrow until the rightful financial owner authorizes release. Then he nodded to the sound technician. The microphone clicked off. The camera panned slowly over the guests' frozen silent faces, half lit by chandeliers that suddenly seemed too bright. Grace's image lingered for a second, standing center stage, surrounded by elegance paid for by the man she'd erased. And in that silence, the truth finally did what truth always does. It balanced the books. I closed my laptop gently. There was no satisfaction, no applause, just stillness. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through spreadsheets. I poured myself a cup of coffee, added 1 sugar, and stared out the window at the quiet street below. For 74 years, I'd believed that God worked in mysterious ways. Tonight, I realized He also works in meticulous ones. My pastor once told me God doesn't need to strike with thunder. Sometimes He just pauses the music until the truth can sing on its own. By dawn, every paper in Palm Beach was running the same headline: Charity Gala implodes. Amid financial scandal, founder's father identified as benefactor. The photograph said everything words couldn't grace, standing under the hotel chandeliers, mascara running, Evelyn gripping her arm, and guests in tuxedos half rising from their seats in confusion. I didn't need to buy a copy. One of my old clients texted me the link with a single line, "You didn't raise your voice, Robert. You just raised the evidence." By mid-morning, 3 different board members from the Grace Foundation called my office line. They wanted answers, quiet, private, off-the-record answers. I agreed to meet them at noon in a conference room at Callahan & Sons, the firm I'd built with my bare hands before retirement. Helen joined me as calm and sharp as ever. When the board arrived, their smiles were brittle. They looked like people trying to decide whether to apologize or negotiate. One of them, a man named Stevens, cleared his throat. "Mr. Callahan, we just need clarification. The media says the trust owns 72% of the foundation's assets. Is that true?" I slid a folder across the table. 72.4 to be precise. Every cent documented. Another board member, a younger woman, leaned forward. "And the audit? Was it really initiated by you?" "Yes," I said. "After discovering unauthorized withdrawals and misclassified expenditures totaling $90,000. There was silence. Papers rustled. Finally, Stevens asked, "What do you want, Mr. Callahan? Damage control reimbursement?" I folded my hands. "No. I want ownership of what's mine and transparency for what isn't. I'm assuming the bylaws still allow for the reinstatement of the founding trustee." The woman nodded slowly. "They do. Then let's start there." Helen produced the notarized documents. By the time the meeting ended, I was once again the legal chair of the foundation, a title I hadn't asked for, but had earned through 22 years of receipts. Grace hadn't called. Evelyn hadn't either. But silence, I've learned, is its own confession. At 5 p.m., I summoned an emergency press conference, not to humiliate anyone. I'd done enough of that indirectly, but to restore order. The room was packed with reporters, flashing bulbs and murmurs that died when I stepped to the podium. "My name is Robert Callahan," I began. For years, I believed good work could speak for itself. But when good work is rewritten by people who prefer fiction over fact, silence becomes complicity. I paused, letting that hang in the air. The Callahan Family Trust was never created to build image. It was created to build opportunity for underprivileged youth, not for socialite luncheons and imported champagne. Starting today, the Grace Foundation will be restructured under a new name, the Callahan Legacy Fund for Honest Futures. Reporters scribbled. Cameras clicked. I continued. Every dollar will be audited, every recipient verified, and every employee, including family, will reapply for their position. Transparency isn't optional. It's moral accounting. Someone shouted from the back, "Mr. Callahan, is your daughter still involved?" I looked directly into the nearest camera. For now, she's suspended pending review. This isn't punishment. It's procedure. A few gasps, a few nods. Justice, I've learned, rarely feels warm. When the conference ended, Helen walked beside me down the marble hallway. "You just burned down their kingdom," she said quietly. "No," I said. "I just audited it." Outside, the reporters still shouted questions. I kept walking. That evening, as the sun bled into the Atlantic, my phone buzzed. Grace at last. The message was simple. "Dad, please meet me. I need to understand." I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back, "Tomorrow, 8 a.m. at the office. Bring honesty, that's the only document I'll accept." Then I set the phone face down, poured a small cup of black coffee, and whispered a quiet prayer, not for her apology, but for her awakening. Because some reconciliations don't begin with forgiveness. They begin with accounting. She arrived at the office at 8 sharp, the same punctuality she'd inherited from me. But Grace looked different that morning. Gone was the silver gown elegance, gone the media smile. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes red from a night without sleep. She carried no purse, no jewelry, just a single envelope clutched tightly in both hands. "Dad," she said, standing in the doorway of my old office, "may I come in?" "Of course," I said. "It's still your foundation's building for now." She hesitated, then stepped inside, glancing around the room. The wooden desk, the ledgers, the framed newspaper clipping from 1986, local accountant saves company from bankruptcy. "This place smells like you," she murmured. "Integrity doesn't need perfume," I said softly. "It lingers." Grace sat down. I read everything she said, voice trembling. The audit reports, the trust documents, the donation records. "I had no idea, Mom," I raised a hand. "Don't make this about your mother. She's been playing the same song for 30 years. You chose to dance to it." Her head dropped. "You're right." I did. She opened the envelope and slid a folded letter toward me. "I wrote this last night." I wasn't sure if I should send it or say it. I unfolded the page. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs written in the same neat handwriting she'd used on her first homework assignments. "Dad, I built a castle out of your foundation and called it mine. I replaced gratitude with pride, truth with marketing, and you with convenience. I thought love was something to rebrand. I was wrong. When the lights went out at the gala, it wasn't you who embarrassed me. It was my reflection. I finally saw who I'd become." By the time I reached the end, her handwriting had blurred behind my eyes. She whispered, "I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to rebuild it right. I want to earn back what I lost." I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under years of weight, not physical, but paternal. "Grace," I said quietly when your mother left. "I told myself one day you'd teach me what forgiveness feels like. Instead, you taught me what accountability looks like." She blinked, confused. "Forgiveness without accountability," I continued, "is charity without balance. It empties itself and calls it virtue. You've been raised to believe love means never being questioned. But real love asks for receipts." She nodded slowly, tears sliding down her cheeks. "What do I do now?" I opened my desk drawer and took out a checkbook. I wrote a number, tore the check out, and slid it across the table, $500,000 payable to the Callahan Legacy Fund. In the memo line I wrote, "For the daughter who rebuilds." Her eyes widened. "Dad, I can't, you can," I said. "But not today. That check isn't money. It's a mirror. When you're ready to sign your name beside mine, bring it back. Until then, it's just paper." She held the check as if it were a confession. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out something I hadn't seen in 20 years, the old photo of her gap-toothed, holding the sign, "World's Best Dad." "I kept it," she whispered. "Even when I tried to forget." I smiled faintly. "Then maybe you didn't forget. You just got distracted." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The office clock ticked softly in the background, steady, honest, consistent. When she finally stood to leave, I said, "Grace." She turned. "You don't owe me perfection. Just truth. That's all I ever asked." She nodded. "You'll have it." After she left, I unfolded her letter one more time and read it again, slower this time. The paper was thin, but the weight of it filled the room. Then I reached for my pen and added a single line at the bottom, "Acknowledged and accepted with conditions." I placed the letter inside the trust file under 2024 audit findings. Some fathers pass down fortunes. I preferred to pass down ledgers, balanced ones. And maybe I thought that was my real inheritance all along. 6 months later, Palm Beach woke to headlines of a very different kind. Callahan Legacy Fund reopens, daughter leads reform, father stays silent. The front page photo showed Grace standing at a podium, hair tied back, no diamonds, no designer gown, just a navy suit, simple pearl earrings, and a sincerity money can't buy. Behind her was the new logo, the Callahan Legacy Fund for Honest Futures. No gold lettering, no glamour, just truth. I watched the broadcast from my kitchen table, sunlight pouring across the marble countertop, where I'd once calculated every bill she didn't know I'd paid. Grace's voice trembled slightly as she spoke. 6 months ago, this foundation stood on shaky ground, built more on image than integrity. But today, it stands on truth. Because the man who built it, my father, believed that numbers like people only have value when they're honest. There was applause. Gentle, not thunderous, the kind that comes from respect, not spectacle. She continued, "We've refunded misused donations, audited every expense, and established an oversight board that reports directly to our beneficiaries. From now on, every dollar will be traceable, every story verifiable. We call it transparent philanthropy." Her words hit me harder than I expected, not because they were eloquent, but because they were measured. For the first time, my daughter wasn't performing. She was accounting. The camera panned to the audience, students, families, local volunteers, people who would never attend galas or sip vintage champagne, but whose lives this foundation was meant to change. And sitting in the last row, far from the cameras, was me. I hadn't planned to go, but Helen insisted. If you taught her to build truth, you should at least watch her stand on it. Grace didn't know I was there until the applause faded. When she looked out into the crowd, her eyes caught mine. For a second, the confident founder vanished, and I saw my little girl again, the one who once held up that crayon sign that said, "World's Best Dad." After the event, she found me outside by the fountain. The Florida air was soft, full of salt and second chances. "Dad," she said quietly, "I didn't think you'd come." "Accountants show up for audits," I said, half smiling. She laughed, wiping a tear. "I wanted to surprise you." "You did," I said, "in every way that matters." She handed me something, the check I'd written months ago, now signed. "It's yours again," she said. "Every cent will go where it was meant to the kids, the scholarships, the truth." I looked at the signature, Grace Callahan. No title, no embellishment. Just her name. It was the most honest thing she'd ever written. "I'm proud of you," I said quietly. "Not for fixing it, for facing it." She nodded, eyes shining. "I'm not perfect, Dad." "Neither are balance sheets," I said. "But they can still reconcile." We stood there a while, listening to the water ripple over marble. The noise of the crowd had faded, leaving only the hush of peace, the kind I hadn't felt in years. When she finally left to meet her staff, Helen walked over holding 2 cups of coffee. "She did it," she said softly. "She did," I replied. "Turns out Grace is more than a name. It's a process." Helen smiled. "You always said forgiveness takes work." "It does," I said, taking the coffee. "But it's the only investment that never loses value." Later that afternoon, as the last guests drifted away, I walked into the refurbished office building. On the wall near the entrance hung a new dedication plaque, founded by Robert Callahan, rebuilt by Grace. I traced the letters with my fingertip and felt the weight lift. For once, the numbers matched the story. And as I stepped back into the sunlight, I thought maybe this is what redemption sounds like. Not applause, just quiet honesty settling into place. That evening, the ocean was calm again, the same steady rhythm that had carried me through every storm in 74 years of life. I sat on the veranda of my house overlooking the Atlantic, a ledger open beside my tea, the salt air carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the garden. The pages were filled not with numbers anymore, but with reflections, tiny lines of truth that no accountant could quantify. At the top of the page, I wrote in my neat block letters, "Final entry, the Grace account. For most of my life, I believed legacy was something you left behind. A house, a trust, a balance sheet with your name neatly printed at the top. But watching Grace today changed that. Legacy isn't what you leave. It's what you restore." I thought of Evelyn somewhere far away, probably rehearsing her version of the story for anyone willing to listen. I felt no anger left for her, only distance. She'd built a life on reinvention, but even reinvention has to reconcile its debts. Grace had called me an hour ago, just before sunset. "Dad," she said softly, "we're awarding our first new scholarship next week in Mom's name. Not because she earned it, but because I need to let her go the right way." I smiled at that. "Then you've finally learned the hardest equation of all," I told her. "How to balance truth with compassion." After we hung up, I opened my old briefcase, the same one I carried through 4 decades of audits and deadlines, and took out a small black notebook. Inside was the prayer I'd written the night she was born. "Lord, make her strong enough to stand in truth, humble enough to admit when she's wrong, and wise enough to know the difference." It took her 33 years, but he'd answered every word. I set the notebook aside and looked around the study, the framed certificates, the ledgers, the photos. All of it was proof of a life spent counting, measuring, reconciling. But tonight I didn't want numbers. I wanted peace. I turned to the final page of the ledger and wrote, "All debts forgiven. All lessons accounted for. Balance achieved." Then I closed the book. The wind picked up just enough to rustle the curtains. The candle on the table flickered its flame, dancing like an approving nod from the universe. Helen arrived a few minutes later, as she often did on quiet evenings. She carried 2 cups of coffee and that knowing look of someone who'd seen me fight wars without ever lifting my voice. "Still working?" she asked with a smile. "Just finishing," I said. "It's strange, Helen. After a lifetime of numbers, I finally ran out of things to count." She sat across from me. "Maybe that's the point. You don't count peace. You live it." We sat in silence, watching the last light fade over the horizon. The sky turned amber, then rose, then the deep indigo of closure. Helen finally said, "You know, most men your age chase legacy through money. You built yours through correction." I chuckled. "Old habits die consistent." She raised her cup. "To balanced books and forgiven hearts." I lifted mine. "To truth, God's most reliable currency." The clink of porcelain echoed softly between us, and for a moment the world felt perfectly reconciled. Later, when she left, I walked back into the house. The lights were low, the air cool, and on the piano sat a small framed photo Grace had sent me that morning. Her and a group of students at the new scholarship ceremony. On the back, she'd written, "Thank you for giving me the numbers to find my way back." I smiled and placed it next to my old ledger. Then I opened my worn Bible, the one I'd kept since my wedding day, and whispered into the quiet room, "In the end, Lord, every number returns to 0. But grace, real grace, never does." And with that, I closed the book, turned off the lamp, and let the calm of the ocean finish the story I no longer needed to tell. If this story reached you, share it. Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to follow Brian's Stories, where every life has a ledger and every truth finds its balance.